All right. Welcome, everybody, to Finance 445. Welcome back to many of you who I had in Finance 444. Hopefully, you made it through that course and felt successful in that course. Most of my Finance 444 participants got a good grade. I had a handful, well, I shouldn't even say a handful, I just had a couple that just didn't complete the work, and so I guess they'll be taking that course again at some point in the future. But for those of you who did a great job, congratulations. This course is a little bit different. Not only are we doing something a little bit different than investments like we talked about last course, we're talking about estate planning, which is a related topic when it comes to financial planning, but we're only going to be focused on one chapter. So this entire course, this entire model, for weeks, we're going to be talking about one chapter worth of material. That's just chapter 15 in the book. And so it's a pretty heavy chapter. I mean, it's got a lot of material, but we're going to have more time each week to discuss. Hopefully, a few of you will be able to make it to our 8:30 mod going forward. If you have a suggestion for a different time that might work better, I'm willing to take those suggestions, although my schedule is pretty tight with the different obligations that I have. And so it's unlikely that we can move it, but I'm happy to hear suggestions if there is a time that would work better. I'm teaching 2 classes, so I do teach a class a little bit earlier in the evening. This is a later course, and for those of you who are back east or even in the Midwest, I realize it'd be a big sacrifice to come to a course this late. So anyway, not a problem if all of you can't make the live sessions, although I really do appreciate, like Frida, for example, in 444, I don't know that she's in this class, but she would come to all the sessions, and that did help me to be a better instructor when I'm not talking to air, right? So anyway, we'll do our best this evening, even without a participant. We're going to talk about, like I say, estate planning, just one of the elements or one of the sections of Chapter 15. We've got a test that's got 25 questions on it at the end of the course that we need to make sure and review the topics that you'll need to know for that. So that'll take a little bit longer tonight than usual. Usually that quiz 1, that first week test is only 10 or 20 questions. This week is 25. So we'll spend some time on that at the end of the class. We'll review expectations for the course, although I know many of you, it will be a really boring review. You're welcome to skip forward if you're listening to the recording of this, if you've heard my expectation spiel that I give every single course. And it is consistent, so you don't need to worry about missing something if you felt like you got it last time. But I will review that briefly. I'll try to be fast with that. Then we'll go over some slides. Primarily the slides in this course I've just cut and paste out of the text. Okay, so it's material from the text. I especially like when they go into their tips format, where they just give you some bullet point tips about different elements of financial planning, or excuse me, in this case, estate planning, which is part of financial planning. So we'll go over some of those. I think that'll be helpful. We've also got to spend a little bit of time, and there's some bullet points under the readings and tools for this week's for this week. Some basic estate planning issues. The problem is that the material is old enough, when the course was set up, that we need to update some of that material and give you some more current information. So we'll spend some time and update that information as well. All right, so we'll do that with the slides, then we'll cover the test, as we mentioned. That'll take a little bit longer tonight, and then we'll wrap it up. So a couple things. First of all, if you don't know me, and if you haven't had me before, my name is David Shipley. I'm a Certified Financial Planner, or CFP, for Zions Bank here locally in Utah. I've been working for Zions Bank for about 2.5 years as a financial advisor, which basically means that I do financial planning, insurance, and investments for clients of the bank. And then I also, before that, I was about 5 years at JP Morgan Chase as a financial advisor. Before that, I was an independent. I had my own investment and financial planning company. And before that, I worked for Northwestern Mutual, which is a large insurance firm. Throughout my time in investments and in financial planning, I've always had a close relationship with estate planning attorneys. And the reason for that close relationship with estate planning attorneys is because in my line of work, whether it's insurance, investments, or financial planning, estate planning always becomes an important part of what I do for clients. So it's not that I actually draw up trusts or wills. I don't write them. I don't do powers of attorney for people. I don't do any of those things because I'm not an attorney. Attorney needs to be the one to write those types of documents. However, I'm versed enough in estate planning in order to give my clients, it enables me to give my clients good feedback and information about how they can set up their estate planning. And then, of course, I just refer them off to attorneys to actually draw up the documents. Okay, but estate planning touches all elements of the financial planning that I'm doing for my clients. And in fact, if you all were to ever be interested in becoming a financial advisor and then wanted to get the designation Certified Financial Planner or CFP, one full section of the test, of the 5 or 6 sections that are in the CFP test, that's an exam. It's a 2-day test with a very low pass rate. It's a very difficult test, but one full section is on estate planning. It's that important to the financial planning process. So that's a little bit about me. I did complete an MBA through Independence U. I did it over the last couple years. I already had a master's degree in financial services, but I wanted my MBA. So I was able to do that because I teach here at the school and have for about 6 years. So I've probably taught over 100 classes over the past 6 years, online classes, but I've also taken online classes. And so I'll try to be sensitive to the average student, because I was in your shoes, just within the last few years taking courses, MBA courses through the school. Before that, I attended Utah State, BYU, and the American College out in Pennsylvania for my degrees. All right, so let's talk a little bit about expectations, basic expectations for the course. Once again, this will be a review for most of you. I'll try to go fairly quickly through it, and then I'll try to slow down once we get into the meat of the information. But as some of you know, that if you've had me before, sometimes I get going fairly fast and I stay at a fairly quick speed. And knowing that you guys can review and re-review these sessions, I don't feel too bad about that. We want to get as much information to you as we possibly can. So expectations for the course, basically, real straightforward. You want to do your checkpoints. Your checkpoints give you about a half a letter grade worth of extra credit every single mod. If you want to be successful in the course and get an A in the course, it's great to have the cushion from the checkpoints, just in case you struggle with one of the tests or assignments. Something like that can set you back a little bit. But if you've got the extra credit associated with the checkpoints over and above the basic checkpoint, credit, as far as the points for checkpoints, then you'll be in great shape because you'll have 50, 60 points of extra credit. So if you come asking me for extra credit, I'm going to point you right back to checkpoints because that's the easiest way to get extra points in a class like this. Find a consistent time of the day. Do it every day. Just make it a habit. Get in there, get your checkpoint done, and effort it a little bit so that you can get those easy points. The next easiest thing in a course like this is the discussion board. Discussion board's really straightforward. Shouldn't be any surprises here. I need a main post with 2 to 3 paragraphs by Wednesday at midnight. I need 2 more peer responses before Saturday at midnight for a total of 3 total posts on the board each week. The main post needs to be fairly substantive. It needs to have 2 to 3 paragraphs and at least 1 to 2 references or sources. And if you do all that, by the end of the week, you'll have full credit on the discussion board. There are no right or wrong answers on the discussion board. I just want to make that very clear. It's all about perspective. It's all about experiences. It's all about sharing opinions. Okay. The only reason we want you to do some research on the discussion board is to help formulate perspective and opinions if it's something that you haven't thought through before. Okay. Doesn't mean if you have thought it through before that you shouldn't still have references, but it's more important. The reason that those references are there are more to help you with your opinions. So one of the things I always tell classes is that a discussion board is more about your writing, your opinions, and perspective than it is about your research. I always enjoy research. Sometimes people get a little carried away with their research on the main post. They end up regurgitating or copying and pasting something they found online, and I see very little of their own effort as far as their own opinions, perspectives, and experiences with the topic. Okay? So I've given you fair warning. The discussion board is for your opinions, perspective, primarily, and then it's about some research that's supplemental to your opinions. So the reason I'm giving you this warning is I will not give you full credit on the main post if all you've done is cut and paste material from online. from some online research. I need more than that. I need you to do the online research in order to formulate opinions, and then I need you to share those opinions on the discussion board for full credit. Okay? So pretty straightforward, but just something that might be a little nuanced difference from other professors or instructors that you've had. They might not worry about that as much. I think the whole purpose of the discussion board is for you to form and share opinions. And so we need to accomplish that and make sure that's the bulk of what we're doing. If you look at your main post and it's mostly just a cut and paste job, you're not going to get full credit. You need to make sure most of it's your own writing. Even if you are referencing, sources, it needs to be mostly your own writing, mostly your own opinions perspective on the topic. Okay? It does take a little bit more effort, but that's the better way to learn in a course like this. So let me know if you have any questions. If anybody has any questions about discussion board expectations, you'll know right away, based on the feedback that I give you, whether or not you're on track, and should be just fine. Okay? So that's the second easiest way to get points. The third easiest way to get points in a class like this are the tests. Tests are usually pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you the material and topics that you need to know for the test each week during the session. If you'll take notes during the session about the topics that'll be on the test, and then have some purposeful studying and reading that occurs during the week, then you should be in great shape for the test. Now, I always have a handful of people every single mod that email me and say, hey, there were these tricky questions on the test I didn't get right. I don't think that a test should try to trick us, and I absolutely agree. The test shouldn't try to trick you to get it wrong. What it should do is establish whether or not you've done some studying beforehand or not. If you're just searching for the answers once you get to the test, which I understand there are going to be a handful of you that do that every single mod, but if you're just searching for the answers, know that you might find some of the questions a little trickier. And the point is that we don't want them to be too straightforward, or it is just something that becomes an exercise of just Googling, for answers when you're taking the test. Believe me that you're not, surprising us by telling us that that's what you've done on some of your tests in the past, okay? What we want to have happen, ideally, is for you to study the material, study the chapter, have the topics, try to get some notes and information into your head and understand the information, and then get to the test already with that information, okay? Because if you'll do it that way, the test questions will make a lot more sense. They'll feel a lot more straightforward, and you'll probably find that your scores on your test are pretty good, okay? But it does take some effort, and there's a reason for that. So it's not that the test questions are trying to trick you, but they are a little bit less obvious in some cases, and the reason is because we need to test people for actually doing what the course is trying to require of you, which is to listen to the session and to read the material, right? So if you're not doing those two things, the test probably will be a little bit trickier, a little bit harder. If you're doing both those things, you might still have some test anxiety, you might still struggle with tests, but you'll be much better off than if you didn't, okay? All right, so that's the tests, pretty straightforward. The tests are about a third of your grade. Most of that is the final test, but each week, it adds up. There's 50 points this week, 25 questions, so 2 points on average per question for this week. All right. So that's the assessments. The hardest thing for most every course that I ever teach, as far as the feedback that I get from students, is the assignments. The assignments, you'll have an assignment every week for the first 3 weeks, like you would expect from any other course that you've taken, probably online. Those assignments will be due each week. They'll have some minimum expectations. They will be worth 120 points each, which amounts in total to more than a third of your grade coming from the assignments. The assignments are, because they're the hardest thing, or at least the thing that takes the most effort usually in a course like this, they're the thing that most predictably is procrastinated, okay? So I understand that. I've been there, but I will just, caution you, like I always do every single course that I teach, that if you leave all your assignments to the very end, I will still accept them. I will not give you full credit for late work, but I will still accept them and give you most of the credit. But what inevitably ends up happening is that I have a few people who get caught at the end with assignments and get overwhelmed by how much they have to do and then quit on the course, or they just don't have enough time to complete it. So I'll tell you my personal story. There were a couple times during my coursework with my MBA online where I just had some very busy weeks. I wasn't able to get to the assignments, and so I was anticipating getting the assignments done before the end of the course. And of course, it seems like every single time you wait and procrastinate, something else goes wrong. Either your connection doesn't work, your computer breaks down, a family emergency, health issue, job issue, something comes up, and it makes it very difficult to get those done. And so for me, I had a few scares a couple times where I was close to not being able to get those assignments done, and it was scary enough that I ended up, staying on track for most of my classes throughout my online college career. I would just tell you that, if something can go wrong, it probably will if you're really procrastinating everything in the course. And when something goes wrong, there's nothing I can do about that at that point. Usually, it's a situation where we probably just won't pass the class. Okay, so I don't mean to scare you, but I am trying to motivate you to stay caught up, to get your assignments in, to make sure and not save them all to the very end, because that usually creates a potential for some heartache at the end. And the worst thing in a class like this, obviously, the worst thing that can happen in a class like this is that you don't pass, right? We paid for it, we're efforting it, we're coming, we're trying, and if we don't pass, it's just a big waste of time, money, and effort. So the thing that I'm trying to do as your instructor is to try to create any possible avenue for us to be able to pass the class, but I can't do it without your effort and some of your work. And so I just strongly encourage you to get all your work in. Obviously, that's the easiest way to pass a class like this. If you want to get an A from a class like this, do everything and do it on time and do it according to the instructions, and you'll be fine. You'll get an A. It's pretty straightforward. It just takes the effort and time and energy, that will be required. All right. So that's kind of an overview of the expectations. Pretty straightforward. I did have a slide, I think, but we've gone over most everything on it. I'll just review real quick, make sure that I've gone through it all. Talked about expectation, talked about learning objectives for this particular course, just everything as it pertains to estate planning. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable leaving this course feeling like, hey, I've got a pretty good understanding of what estate planning is all about, right? The importance of it, what it is, how we use it, those types of things. As far as this week is concerned, you've got an assignment that's basically a chapter and financial planning exercise. I've cut and pasted onto our slides here in a second, so you'll see it, although it's kind of small. But anyway, it's a pretty straightforward assignment, basically a financial planning exercise that's a question at the end of the chapter. As you guys will remember from 444, if you had me in 444, I'm not a stickler on APA. I'm not a stickler on word counts. What I am a stickler on is if the question asks you to answer something, right? And you think in your mind, well, I could answer this with one word, one sentence, or a paragraph. I would strongly encourage you to give me at least a couple sentences to a paragraph, okay, for different questions, even if they come across like they're short answer questions, okay? Fully demonstrate that you understand the material from the chapter, and you will get full credit. If you don't fully demonstrate that, I can't give you full credit, okay? So that's the caveat. I'm not going to count your words, and I'm not going to count your pages, and I'm not going to discount you or deduct you if you don't have strict APA format. However, I need to see that you comprehensively answer the questions and show me, demonstrate to me that you understand the material from the chapter. Okay? That's the expectation for the assignment each week. Assessment this week, we already talked about it, 25 questions. We'll spend a lot more time here in a few minutes on that. Discussion board this week is a fairly interesting one. Just talks about why estate planning is important. Let's give some opinions and perspective on estate planning. Let me hear from some of you, I hope, on the discussion board about experiences that you've had trying to settle estates for parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, somebody that have turned either really good, where things worked out how they're supposed to, or more commonly, you hear the horror stories of how things don't work out when estate planning's not done well or not in place at all. And if you're willing to share, I'd love to hear some of those stories as well, because it's motivating to the rest of us to hear those types of stories to avoid estate planning pitfalls that we potentially can get into ourselves. Okay. And then, of course, you've got your checkpoints for this week, and you're already well on your way for that. We've had a couple of them, right? Okay. So what is estate planning? How is it defined? How does the book define estate planning? The book is going to talk about how estate planning is basically the transition, okay, or the planning, the preparation for the transition of your assets. Okay. So it's probably got more flowery terms than I just used, but basically it just comes down to preparing Okay, preparing your assets for transfer in the future. It doesn't have anything to do with where necessarily those assets go as far as how it's defined. It just some kind of transition is going to happen, whether or not you transition assets to the government, through taxes or through probate, or whether or not you transition it to your children or charity or some other kind of entity. Your assets are going to transfer when you die because you no longer can hold them in your own name when you pass away. So maybe they'll all go to your spouse, right? Maybe it's really simplistic as far as your estate planning. Everything that I own, everything that I have financially is going to go to my spouse, okay? Or maybe it's a little more complicated because you want to plan ahead just in case your spouse predeceases you, or you divorce, or something else happens that might compromise that straightforward, simple plan that you had in your mind. So estate planning is preparing for the future transfer of assets. Might happen sooner, might happen later, but it's preparation. Okay, it's planning for that future transfer. So who needs it? Well, the chapter that we're reading in chapter 15 is basically gives you feedback that everybody needs some basic estate planning. Okay, sometimes we get caught in the mode of thinking, okay, if I'm going to go do an estate plan with an attorney, I'm going to go pay $5,000, and I'm going to get a trust and a will and guardianship and living will, all these different pieces and parts. It's going to be really comprehensive. I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours. I'm going to get 5 binders full of information, and I just don't have the money or time or energy for that at this point in my life. Okay, and then we say, I don't need any estate planning. But the bottom line is, no matter where we're at in life, no matter what our situation is, complex or simple, we probably do need some basic estate planning. We probably do need a little bit of effort put into how your assets, whatever you own, anything that you own, whether or not it has value or not, anything that you own will have to transfer, right, in the end. And so it's not enough to just say, well, I don't really care what happens to my stuff, although a lot of people do say that. It's something where if you would like to be purposeful with your stuff, you'd like it to go to a certain sibling, parent, child, grandchild, the government, a college, a charity, those types of things. Whether or not you have a lot of stuff of value or not, or complex situation or not, estate planning can have there can be a reason for estate planning. Just a quick example. Young family, with a small child, okay, no assets, right? They rent an apartment. They barely have ramen in the cupboard because it's just really tight financially. So they really don't own anything of value, and they think, well, we don't need estate planning because we're young and we don't have anything at this point, and we can't afford it, right? We don't have any money to be able to do it anyway. Well, the rebuttal to that from an estate planning perspective or financial planning perspective would be, what about if something happens to you and your spouse? Where does your child go, right? And you might say, well, my parents would take them. Well, no, actually the state would be the one to decide if you haven't decided through a guardianship document. And you'd be surprised how often the state allows siblings and parents, both sets of parents, to kind of fight over a child that you should have done some pre-planning for and dictated where that child should go instead of government, instead of a court, right? And they're going to do the best job they can, but it potentially could be very expensive for who you intended the baby to go to or your child to go to. So that's just a quick example. Guardianship is one of those quick things that you can get documentation online, fill it out, basically, record your wishes as far as where your child should go, who should have guardianship, your first, choice, your second choice, just in case your first choice, declines. For whatever reason, there are lots of different reasons that potentially could happen. Even if they said they will, when you're gone, they potentially could decline for whatever reason. And so you want to have some alternatives as well. But that's just a quick example of it's not about money in that case. It's about, your children in that case. And so when I talk about the future transfer of assets, it can encompass more than that. We talk in terms, in terms of financial planning and estate planning sometimes, like our children are assets, but really they're more than that, right? Obviously. But in this case, that'd be something we should pre-plan for and just do some basic things to take care of that. Another issue, that's completely not financial at all is a living will. When we talk about a living will, we're talking about whether or not a doctor should be authorized to shut off life support if you've basically been deemed, as somebody who's not going to resuscitate. Okay, so somebody who's not going to come out of a coma state. So if you've already filled out a living will that says, hey, look, if I'm in that situation, it's been a certain amount of time, and the doctors feel like it's highly unlikely that I'll come out, then pull the plug, shut off the machine, let me pass away. Okay, that's something that you can pre-plan for. Doesn't have anything to do with finance. Well, it can have something to do with finances, but it's less of a financial decision, more of just a moral decision, or a decision that you pre-make in terms of your own mortality, right? Well, why does that matter? Why wouldn't your family make it for you? Well, it doesn't take long if you were to do some searches online to find some very ugly situations where family members fight over somebody who's in a coma state. You might have a spouse who says, no way, we're never going to pull the plug. And you might have parents that say, you know what, this is no life. They're going to come out and they're going to have mental illness or mental disabilities, They're not ever going to have, if they were to ever come out, they're going to have such limited capacity. We just don't want that for them. We want them to pass gracefully and move on, and not have to, have all the medical costs and worry and stress about, the situation for, months, years even. So that can become a huge battle. It can go to court. It can be just really ugly and divide families if we haven't done a little bit of pre-planning. Once again, not a comprehensive trust, not a $5,000 estate plan through an attorney, but just some basic forms that we can get through our state. They're specific state by state, to make sure that we've got that living will election already pre-decided. Okay, and then we can change our mind later if we want. It's not a one-time decision that we never change. It's something that we can change, but once again, it would require us to update that. So how can estate planning help a situation? I've given you a couple examples that, your kids, the living will situation. Another, example of how it can help is if something were to happen to you where you become disabled or unavailable, or, let's say Alzheimer's or Parkinson's sets in and you start to lose, some mental capacity, which happens to most of us. Statistically, it happens to most of us at some point that we lose some of our mental capacity. If we have powers of attorney, springing powers of attorney, durable powers of attorney within some estate plan that we have, that allows somebody else, to act on our behalf for our finances if we become incapacitated for some reason, or unable, mentally to accomplish what needs to be done financially for ourselves and make decisions for ourselves. So this is a highly likely situation or scenario that will happen sooner or later for all of us, where we might become compromised as far as our ability to competently make financial decisions for ourselves. And powers of attorney, another estate planning piece of estate planning, legal estate planning, that helps us have that planned for and helps us be able to cope with that situation, and be able to deal with that situation by getting the help that we need, instead of allowing the state, through attorneys, once again, allowing them after the fact to assign somebody to act on our behalf. That might not be who we intended to act on our behalf, right? Could be the wrong sibling. And maybe some of you don't have that situation, but all of us probably can think through family members, uncles, aunts, parents, siblings. We can think of at least one of them that we would not want making financial decisions for us. Well, court might not know that, right? And that might be the person that's willing to do it. So it might end up in the wrong situation with the wrong decisions being made. So powers of attorney are really important. But basic estate planning and trust planning can also be a situation where, it helps the stuff that we have get to the places that we intend for it, right? Instead of government or instead of courts deciding that for us, because they are not ever going to probably agree with what we had intended. And that can be, something very simple, like something that doesn't have much value but has a lot of sentimental value to the family. Those types of items tend to tear families apart if they're not spoken for, or if they're not dictated in a will. Okay, we're talking about a will now, not a living will, but a will. And the will or a trust is where you list your assets and make sure that they, that they go to where you intend them to go, right? And if there's a very valuable piece of jewelry that every single person in the family wants, you got to be really careful and think through how you're going to give that through your estate. Some families end up just selling some of their stuff so that there won't be a fight, but there definitely will be a fight if people are having to try to guess what your intentions were because you didn't write it down. When you start to guess about intentions, you end up with family feuds, and it really can tear families apart. I'm not trying to overstate this. I don't think there's a way to understate it. It really does tear families apart all the time. I've seen it happen multiple times with different families that I work with as far as my clients, where siblings will stop talking to each other and completely, start hating each other over estate issues because parents or grandparents did not put down very clearly where things should go. And because they didn't, it's left for siblings to kind of fight and battle over it. And when it comes to, battling over sentimental things and also money, you can put them in a situation where you really, really compromise the family relationships over just a lack of planning. So who can help you with your planning? I've already alluded to this, but you can have a certified financial planner or planner kind of help you walk through what issues might be important to address within an estate plan. But then in the end, there are elements of an estate plan that you can just get the documents at like LegalZoom and take care of yourself. But if you're trying to get a comprehensive trust or do some significant legacy planning, those types of documents, to verify that they're done right and to do them right, you should probably consult an attorney and have an attorney help with that. Okay, like we had mentioned earlier. All right, so here's the first cutout from the chapter's reading. Talks about having a will. And it basically says there's no excuse not to have a will, right? The fact that 2 out of 3 people, don't have a will means that there are a lot of people that think that they shouldn't get one because they don't need one. But what the book's trying to state here on this tip is that basically everybody needs it. So even if you're young, or if you think your family knows what they should do with your assets, or you don't have very many assets like we talked about earlier, or your mom's going to take care of the kids, or you think it's going to be too expensive, or all your assets are just going to go to your spouse, or you're single and don't have any kids and you think that there's nothing there to protect. These are all reasons or excuses that people give. These are the most common ones. And in each case, there's a reason why some basic planning should take place. Okay? And I think the book does a very good job of going through those. We've talked through a bunch of them already, so I'm not going to go into specifics on each one of these. But there's a pretty good and legitimate reason for everybody to have some basic estate planning, and especially, at least just a living will, powers of attorney, guardianship, and a basic will or trust. Okay, and those types of things, as long as they're straightforward, can all be documents that we find online. If we want to make sure they're done right and consult somebody about doing them right, as we mentioned before, makes sense to consult with an attorney. State of Utah, estate planning, basic trust, just as an example, usually costs somewhere around $1,000 to $1,200. There are other states where they're much more expensive. For example, if you live in Southern California, you're probably going to be paying a lot more than that. But here in Utah, about $1,200 for a basic trust with all those other documents included. And that's having an attorney consult and help you with it. Okay. Now, there are attorneys that charge a lot more than that. I've seen estate plans that are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 fee, to do them because they're big, they're complicated, they have a lot of issues. Then I've seen others that, are a little bit cheaper. And then, of course, you can go online and get documents for a few $100, and do all the documents yourself. But we just would want to make sure that you do them right? And if you're not sure about doing them right, it probably was worth that extra money to have an attorney help out. Okay. So no excuse as far as wills are concerned. All right. So what are some major issues or potential pitfalls with estate planning? The book goes through a few. You can have excessive transfer costs. Okay. And this usually happens when an estate has to go through probate. And what is probate? Probate is the government's way, basically, of saying, if you don't list out how your assets should transfer, then we have to get involved. And basically probate, the purpose of probate is just an orderly distribution and transfer of assets when a person doesn't have a trust and doesn't have, their assets already, situated to avoid probate. Okay. So if you don't have your assets, if you don't have estate planning done and you don't have your assets outside of probate, they have to go through probate. The court will then, usually how probate works is if you're married, half your assets will go to your spouse. The rest will be divided between your natural born children. If you're not married, they'll be divided between your natural born children. If you have no natural born children, they'll be divided among next of kin in a weird, in a weird way, like next of kin, like uncles, aunts, things like that. And so basically probate it costs a lot of money. You have to pay court fees. Beneficiaries have to pay court fees for that to happen. Some of the assets end up getting eaten up by those fees, and it can take a long time as well to have that happen. What's another issue with trusts or estates that's fairly common is a lack of liquidity. So why does this even matter, and what are we even talking about? Well, an example is a small business owner has a business. Let's say it's a plumbing business, and they pass away. The family comes in and says, okay, now what do we do? They have to shut down the plumbing company, but they still have to pay, the last lease payment. They have to pay, the last payroll, whatever expenses associated with the business. They have to pay for funeral expenses. They have to pay potentially for estate taxes. They have to pay a final income tax. There's all kinds of costs that could go into that, and a need for some liquidity, some cash. And what ends up happening is if you don't have that cash, families end up just selling everything on a fire sale, which means that you're getting pennies on the dollar for the true value of what it is. And it can really, really compromise the value of your assets if you have to go through a process where you don't have liquidity and have to end up paying things that you weren't ready to pay when somebody passes. Improper disposition of assets. This is one we've alluded to quite a few times, where assets go to the wrong places. Okay, assets go to people that we didn't intend them to go to because nobody knows, because we didn't get it down. Inadequate income. If we become disabled and we don't have an adequate income, that's a lack of planning, right? Inadequate income for family at a estate owner's death. That's pretty straightforward. That's what you solve with insurance or just cash in the bank. You might have insufficient capital to pay taxes. And there's all kinds of other special problems that might occur, like special needs children, if they're not planned for, can be in a terrible situation, okay, where they have to be, taken care of by the state, or they lose their state funding because you didn't do estate planning, and so the asset just transferred to that special needs child, and that special needs child stopped getting, government support for healthcare, government, subsidy, monthly subsidy for their living costs. It can destroy that if estate planning is not done the right way. Okay. So just some things that we just have to think about. Choosing a guardian for minor children. This is a process, right? We've talked about it a little bit, but there should be a little bit more thought than just, hey, my mom will take care of them, right? Well, a couple years from now, your mom's health might not be good enough to raise your children all the way through adulthood. So you might need to think of other people, that might be able to do that. And like I say, you might want to have contingencies just in case they're in a situation where they can't, even if, as we mentioned before, even if you've talked to them about it and they say, oh, yeah, we'll do it. Well, life changes for all of us, right? What if they're in a significant medical emergency or healthcare scare at the time and they just don't have the capacity to take on children, with that situation? There's all kinds of different things that could come up. Okay, so this gives you a list, and I think a very good checklist of different things to think through. Things like what home they'll be in, the religious and moral beliefs of the person that you're going to leave your children to, the age, right? We talked about that, the family situation, the financial situation, the willingness of that person, all kinds of things that should be thought about. Okay, here's a little tip list of things to do when you write a will. Be clear, right? Don't be vague about where things should go. Nullify anything in the past. If you're writing something new, make sure that it strikes out anything historical. as far as expectations for where assets go. Manage expectations. The easiest way to communicate how things are going to go down is to communicate, right? Make sure that children, especially children, know how things are going to go down before you die. If they do, and you don't have to get really specific, but the more specific you are, the more you can probably avoid problems. Because if the kids all understand and know for sure that these are your expectations and they understand the why behind what you're doing, there's much less likelihood for them to have divisiveness and problems after you pass. Make sure you pick your executor carefully. This is the person who's actually going to execute on your wishes, right? And take care of your financial issues. It can be actually a pretty tough job, and it's got to be somebody who's willing to do that job and willing to do a good job at it. Some people would be very competent but just don't have the time or energy to really do it and do a good job. So just some different things I think, a very good tip list for creating a will. Then a very good tip list on why potentially you might need a trust. Okay, we've talked about a will, right? And that's basically a basic way of transferring assets and stating your wishes as far as where your assets should go. Trust takes it one step further, creates an actual entity. Okay, a separate taxable entity is what a trust creates, and that separate taxable trust entity can hold assets even after you're dead. A will can't hold assets. A will just shows where the assets should go, but a trust can hold them for a certain amount of time and do all kinds of different unique things through a trust. Okay, so the correct estate planning or trust planning can do a lot of things. It can avoid taxes, it can benefit charity in a different way, it can do all kinds of different things. Okay, I mentioned to you under the readings and tools that there were some inaccuracies because of how old the information is. We're going to go through this real quick, and then we'll need to spend the last few minutes on the test material that you need to know for the test. So this is probably too small, but I just wanted to point it out because there are a couple numbers on this slide that are incorrect. Talks about the annual exclusion. This is how much you can gift per person per year without having to do a gift tax return and potentially go into your lifetime exclusion. Okay, your lifetime exclusion is $5.45 million. It used to be 3.5. Okay, that 3.5 number doesn't exist anymore. It's $5.45 million. So if you and your spouse, okay, if you're married, you basically have $10.9 million of exclusion before you get into gift taxes or estate taxes. Okay, so if you want to avoid estate taxes and gift taxes, just don't ever try to transition more than $10.9 million, right? And usually about the time I say that, people are like, well, that's never going to apply to me. But you'd be surprised how fast, between real estate and a business, you might have a net worth that approaches that. And so it's important to do some careful estate planning to make sure that you're not going to pay as little as possible when it comes to estate taxes. Estate taxes end up being about 40%. It's the rate. So anything over 10.9 million between a couple, and you start getting some pretty significant taxes. The other thing just to point out on this number, at 10.9 million, that's basically a recent, you can tell by looking at this, 3.5 million was the one that they were talking about back in 2009. So that number's improved significantly as far as avoiding taxation for people who die. However, seems like every single year there's legislation on the table to change or tinker with this. So it's just something you've got to keep up with and update your trust planning, to keep up with how you're going to avoid taxation if that's, part of your purpose. And then as far as lifetime gifting, while you're still alive, not through your estate, but while you're alive, that number is still $14,000 like it was back in 2013. Okay, they haven't changed that number. So $14,000 per year per person in order to avoid, having to report a gift tax return and start to tap into that $5.45 million that we each have as far as an annual, not an annual exclusion. Annual exclusion is $14,000, but lifetime exclusion from gift taxes and estate taxes is $5.45 per person. So we've got a little bit of that here. 5.43 was last year's number. It's 5.45 this year, and then 14,000 is still the correct number as far as gifting is concerned. Okay. One of the key features of estate planning that we all need to understand is if you want to avoid taxes, there are a lot of different things that you can do, but one of the key features that a married person can do, okay, that's unique to being married, is that you can always have all your assets go to your spouse without incurring any kind of taxation, okay? No gift taxes, no estate taxes. They are the exception. Your spouse is the exception to all those transfer rules, regulations, and taxes. Now, it's when your spouse tries to transition it all to your kids, that's when the rubber hits the road, and that's when the estate planning becomes really important. But anybody can transfer all their assets to their spouse, and it doesn't matter how much they do. There won't be any taxes or implications of that from a tax planning standpoint. It's just when it goes to the next generation or generation skipping, right, to the grandkids, that we start to get into trouble when it comes to taxes. Okay? Life insurance is a great tool, but we're not going to talk about it. There's the slide that I told you I had as far as the assignment is concerned. That's the end of chapter assignment that we're going to be working on for the assignment this week. Okay, but we need to get to the test. So let's take a few minutes and go through material that you'll need to know for the test. Once again, I just, those of you who had me for 444, I just go through the topics. And then, that allows you when you're reading to kind of think through, okay, these are the topics I need to know so I can be more purposeful about how I read, and the information that I glean from my reading will really help me for the test if I know the topics ahead of time. Or that's what it should be anyway. All right, so first question on the test is a true-false question asking you, basically trying to understand whether or not you know or gathered from the reading what the main purposes of estate planning are. What are the main purposes of estate planning? And if you know what those main purposes are, obviously you can identify ones that are not the main purpose of estate planning as far as the book is concerned, right? We want to know the book's perspective on this. These are test questions from a test bank that the publisher of the book created, okay? The school didn't create them. I didn't create them. The book created them, the same publishers that created the book. And so whatever the book has to say about these questions, that's what you want to be answering, okay? Number 2 on the test is really straightforward, but basically I've alluded to the fact that estate planning and financial planning, insurance and investment planning, they're all very, very correlated, right? So I'm a financial planner, I work with investments and insurance, and I end up talking about estate planning all the time. I don't do estate planning. I don't actually write documents for estate planning, but like we talked about, it's very similar businesses. They're very, it takes a coordinated effort when somebody does a good estate plan between their financial planner and their attorney. We want to understand, once again, for number 3, what the main objectives or goals of estate planning are. You'll get that one right. Number 4, same thing, objectives and goals of estate planning. Number 5, we want to understand what first-level death-related costs are. What are first-level death-related costs? Number 6, we want to know what second-level death-related costs are. So what does the book have to say about first-level death-related costs versus second-level death-related costs, and what are some examples of each of those? What does the book have to say about how often we should review our estate plan? How many years should we allow to go by before we regularly, look at our estate plan? Okay. Number 8, we want to know we need to know for number 8 what a probate estate is. What is a probate estate? Okay. What does the book say a probate estate is? Number 9, we want to know what kinds of things would be a reason to update our estate plan versus what kinds of things would not be a reason to update our estate plan. So when we're reviewing our estate plan every period, that the book tells us to, as far as the length of time, about gave you the answer there. What types of life events would justify, changing our documents, as far as our estate planning, and what types of things would not justify changing our estate planning documents. Number 10 on the test, we looked at a graphic that talked about problems with estate planning, and it listed out different issues with estate planning problems, pitfalls. You'll want to know what those are basically. You don't need to memorize them, but just know basically what those are so you can identify it for number 10 on the test, what one of those is. You'll want to know on number 11 the difference between what the book. So the book breaks down estate planning into two parts: people planning and and asset planning. Excuse me. And you'll want to know the difference between people planning and what the book has to say about asset planning. Another pitfall problem on number 12. Pitfalls of estate planning, just to identify it. Number 13 on the test talks about custodial accounts. What are custodial accounts, like UTMA or UGMA accounts? What are they? How are they used? Number 14 on the test is another question about first level versus second level death expenses. Number 15 on the test needs you to understand what an estate breakup is. So just what does the book have to say about estate breakups? Number 16 on the test, we want to know what the advantages of life insurance within estate planning is. What are the advantages of using life insurance within estate planning? Number 17, another question about a probate estate. Just know basically what the book has to say about a probate estate. Number 18 on the test asks about property ownership in other states. What are the advantages and disadvantages of property ownership in other states when it comes to estate planning? Number 19 on the test, the book will talk about keeping important documents together and organized and why that's important. Just know why it's important, basically, to have proper documents organized, financial organized, have some organization to our financial documents and be somewhere where we can easily find them, and things like that. Why is all that important? Number 20, one of the advantages of trust planning, just be able to identify the advantages and disadvantages of using a trust. Number 21 is a question about inflation. So what does the book have to say about inflation as it pertains to trusts and estate planning? Number 22, life insurance question again, advantages, disadvantages of using life insurance within estate planning. Number 23, what do we call property placed in a trust? What do we call property placed in a trust? Number 24, another question about a probate estate. And number 25, we need to be able to define what a will is. Okay, what is a will? Should be able to already do that, but just want to refresh on that before you get to the test, because that's one of the questions. Okay, so those are the 25 questions. A lot of different questions about probate estate, a lot of different questions about wills, trusts, first level and second level death related expenses. So just, find all that information before you get to the test and you'll be in great shape. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Have a great week this week. If you've got any questions or concerns, let me know. Send me a quick email or get in touch with Lindsay Hawes. Lindsay has been a learning coach with these finance classes for a year or two now. I mean, it's been a long time. She's seen all this stuff before and she can really help you out. So if you get stuck somewhere, that's an option as well. But have a great week. Let me know if there's anything we can do to help. And good luck this week. Good evening.